The land was wide. That was the first thing a man knew about it and the last thing he would remember. It was a land that stretched out until the sky bent down to touch it. A great, empty bowl of sun-baked earth and pale grass that whispered when the wind blew, and the wind always blew. It came from nowhere and went everywhere, carrying the dust of mountains a man might never see and the scent of rivers he might never drink from. This was the West, sometime after the year of 1850, but before the century turned over to 1900. It was a hard place for hard people, a place of endings and beginnings, most of them written in blood. Small towns clung to the dirt like stubborn weeds. A few wooden buildings huddled together against the emptiness. They had names like Deliverance or Hope's Folly, names that sounded like a prayer or a joke. Beyond them, the grasslands rolled on forever, broken only by the sharp, distant purple of mountains that looked like the teeth of a saw. Great rivers cut through the plains, wide and slow and muddy, their banks thick with cottonwoods. Near one of these rivers, hidden in a fold of the land, was a village of the people, the Dine, the Navajo. They had lived there longer than the rivers had names, or so the old ones said. Tayo was a man of this village. He stood now on a low rise, watching the sun climb over the plains. He was tall for his people, with shoulders built from pulling a bow and riding hard. His black hair was long, tied back with a simple leather thong. His face was all angles and strength, but his eyes, dark and deep, held a stillness that was not peace. It was the quiet of a place that has seen too much fire. He was a warrior. He had been a warrior since he was a boy of 16 summers. He had fought the Utes, the Apache, and then the blue-coated soldiers. The wars had left scars. He carried a long, pale one on his ribs, where a soldier's bayonet had tasted his blood. But the deepest wounds were inside. He remembered the smoke, the screams of horses, the faces of his friends as they fell. He remembered the empty promises of the white men, their paper treaties that dissolved like snow in spring. He had fought hard. He had fought with skill and a cold fury, but the losses had piled up like stones on his heart. Now, there was a kind of quiet, but it was not peace. It was just an absence. His strength felt pointless, his skill a thing of no use. He was a warrior with no war left to fight that he could win, and no honor left to claim that felt real. He looked at his hands. They were strong hands, calloused and capable. They felt empty. Tayo walked back toward the cluster of hogans. The smoke from the breakfast fires rose straight into the still air. Children played a game with stones, their laughter sharp and clear. It should have been a sound of peace, but to Tayo it felt brittle, like a thin sheet of ice over a dark, cold river. He nodded to an old woman, Hassana, as she sat weaving a blanket. Her fingers, twisted with age, moved with a sureness that was ancient. He wondered if his hands would ever feel that sure again. His hands were made for a rifle, for the grip of a war pony. Hassana's hands were made for creating, his were made for ending. He had been back in the village for 6 months. Before that, he had been away. He did not like to think about where. He had been scouting for the soldiers. It was a bitter thing to remember. He had done it because he thought it would protect his people, a bargain with the devil to keep the wolves from the door. But the wolves had come anyway, wearing the same blue uniforms as the men he had guided. They had promised peace, and then they had brought the long walk. His own family had been forced from their canyons, driven like sheep to the barren lands of the Bosque Redondo. He had not gone with them. He had fled, a traitor in his own eyes, a ghost in the eyes of the soldiers. He had lived in the high mountains for 3 years, alone, like an animal. He hunted. He slept in caves. He spoke to no one. The loneliness had burned him clean, but it had also frozen something inside him. When he finally heard that his people, or what was left of them, had been allowed to return to their lands. He had come down from the mountains. He had found his village, or this new village, built from the ashes of the old one. He had been welcomed back, his time away spoken of in whispers or not at all, but he did not feel welcomed. He felt like a shadow. He wanted to find a way to make his people free, not just free to live, but free to be who they were. He wanted to silence the ghosts. He wanted to restore his honor. But what was honor? Was it fighting he had fought, and they had lost? Was it protecting his people? He had tried, and he had failed. He looked at the children again. Perhaps it was them. Perhaps the future was the only thing worth fighting for. But he did not know how. The world was changing. The old ways were dying, and the new ways were a poison. He needed a new purpose, something to pull him from the walking sleep he lived in. Miles to the east, where the land began to flatten out even more. Alma worked. She was pounding a new post into the ground to mend a fence line. The sound of the heavy mallet hitting the wood was a steady, rhythmic thud. Alma was not tall, but she was built with a sturdy grace. Her hair was the color of dark honey, pulled back in a practical braid that was already coming loose. Her face was flushed from the work. Her gray eyes narrowed against the morning sun. She wore a simple canvas shirt and men's trousers, worn and patched. She did not care what the women in the nearby town of Crossroads thought of her. Let them talk. They did not have to keep cattle in or coyotes out. Alma was alone, but she was not lonely. She had her family's homestead, a small cabin built by her father, a barn, and 160 acres of land that was mostly rock and dust. Her father had died 2 years gone, her mother the year before that. Now there was just her and her younger brother, a boy of 14 named Silas, who was inside the cabin. Alma was independent because she had no choice. She was intelligent, her mind as sharp as the axe she used to split wood. And she was resilient. She had to be. The land demanded it, and so did the world. She finished with the post, testing it with a firm push. It held. She leaned on the mallet for a moment, catching her breath. She was protecting this place. This patch of dirt was hers. It was her family's. She was fighting to keep it. The threats were everywhere. There was the drought, which had lasted 3 long months. There was the bank in Crossroads, which held the note on their land, run by a man with a smile that never reached his cold eyes. There were the larger ranches, like the one run by a man named Harrison, who wanted her water rights and had made it clear he would get them, one way or another. And there were the unspoken rules of the society she lived in. A woman alone was supposed to be married or working in a saloon or taking in washing. She was not supposed to run a homestead. She was not supposed to stand up to men like Harrison, but Alma did. Alma entered the cabin. It was small, just 2 rooms, but she kept it clean. The main room held a stove, a rough wooden table, and shelves with their meager supplies. Silas was at the table, a thin boy with her same gray eyes, his hair a tangled mess. He was sketching on a piece of slate. He was always sketching. He drew horses, mountains, the faces of people he saw in town. He had a talent for it. "You are up late," she said, her voice gentle. She did not scold him. He was not strong, his lungs weak since he was a baby. "I was waiting for you," he said, not looking up from his drawing. "Is the fence mended?" "It is," she said. She went to the stove and poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot. It was more chicory than coffee, but it was hot. "Mr. Harrison's men rode by again last night." Silas looked up then, his eyes wide with fear. "Did they do anything?" "They just looked," Alma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "They are trying to scare us, that is all." "Why do they not just leave us be?" he whispered. Alma sat down across from him. She touched his hand. "Because we have water, Silas, and they want it. In this land, water is worth more than gold. And because," she hesitated, "because we are alone. They think a woman and a boy are easy to push aside." "We are not," he said, his chin coming up with a flash of her same stubbornness. "No," she agreed, a small smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "We are not, but we must be smart. We must be strong." She looked around the small cabin. This was her fortress. This was her home. Her father had poured his life into this land. He had believed in the future, in the promise of the West. Alma did not believe in promises. She believed in hard work, a loaded shotgun, and her own mind. The society they lived in was built by men. For men, it had rules designed to keep women in their place. Alma had no interest in her place. Her place was here, on this land, protecting her brother. She would find a way. She would not be broken. The sun climbed higher, baking the land. Tayo, the Navajo warrior, watched it from his hill, his heart heavy with the past, searching for a future. Alma, the homesteader, felt its heat on her back, her mind focused on the present, bracing for the next fight. They were two people in a vast, uncaring land, separated by miles and by blood, yet bound by the same struggle. They were both trying to hold on to who they were, in a world that was doing its best to grind them into dust. The wind blew between them, carrying the scent of pine from his mountains and the smell of dust from her plains. Their story had not yet begun, but the stage was set. The quiet before the storm could not last much longer. This was a land that did not know the meaning of the word. The storm broke 3 days later. It did not come with clouds or rain. It came with the sound of horses, a drumming on the hard earth that Tayo felt in his bones before he heard it. He was checking his pony's hoof when the sound began. A low, steady rumble from the east. He straightened up, his body going rigid. He knew that sound. It was not a herd of buffalo. It was not a band of Ute raiders. It was the sound of cavalry, many of them, moving fast. A cry went up from the village sentinel, a high, thin wail of warning. Soldiers! Tayo did not wait. He vaulted onto his pony's bare back, grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against his hogan. He kicked the pony into a run, racing toward the low rise where he so often stood. As he crested it, his heart turned to cold iron. They were already visible, a long blue snake winding across the plain. At their head rode a man on a big black horse, an officer, his hat pulled low. Even from this distance, Tayo could see the glint of the sun on a saber and the crisp, arrogant set of the man's shoulders. Behind him, at least 2 companies of cavalry, their blue uniforms dark with sweat and dust, their carbines held ready. They were not coming for a parley. They were coming for war. "To the river!" Tayo shouted, turning his pony and racing back toward the village. "Women, children, to the cottonwoods." Panic erupted. People ran from their hogans, grabbing children, grabbing whatever small things they could carry. The other warriors, perhaps 20 men in all, were grabbing their weapons. An old man, Tside, who had fought beside Tayo's father, ran to his side, his face a mask of grim fury. "Why do they come now, Tayo?" he asked, his voice rough. "We have done nothing." "They do not need a reason," Tayo said, his voice flat. He slid from his pony. "Get the others to the river. Hide them. I will lead the men. We will buy you time." "We will fight with you," Tside said. "No," Tayo commanded. His voice had a new edge, the edge of the warrior he had been, the leader he had forgotten how to be. The emptiness inside him was suddenly gone, replaced by a cold, sharp fire. "Your fight is to protect the children. Go, now!" The old man looked at him, saw the set of his jaw, and nodded. He turned and began shouting orders, gathering the women and the young ones, pushing them toward the life-giving cover of the riverbank. Tayo turned to the other warriors. They were a small group, armed with old rifles, bows, and lances. They were farmers and horse tenders, but he knew their blood. They were Navajo. They would fight. "They come to wipe us out," Tayo said, his voice ringing out in the chaos. "We have seen this before. We know what they will do. We will not let them. We will not be sheep for their slaughter." He pointed to the rocky outcrops at the south end of the village. "We make our stand there. We fight for every stone, For every child. We fight for the dying. A roar went up from the men. They ran to the rocks, fanning out, taking cover. Tayo took a position at the center, his rifle resting on a flat stone. He looked back. The last of the women and children were disappearing into the thicket of trees by the river. He was calm. The ghosts that haunted him were silent. The indecision was gone. There was only this. The soldiers were close now. They slowed, fanning out into a long line. A practiced, deadly maneuver. The officer in the lead, Captain Thorne, raised his saber. Tayo had seen him before, at a failed treaty talk. Thorne was a man who hated the people, his eyes holding a fanatic's light. He believed it was his God-given duty to cleanse the land. In the name of the United States Army, Thorne's voice boomed, clear in the sudden, terrible silence. You are ordered to surrender. Lay down your arms and you will be escorted to the reservation. Tayo's answer was a bullet. He had aimed not for the man, but for the saber. The shot was long, over 300 yards. The bullet shrieked past Thorne's head, so close it made the man flinch and jerk his horse. The saber did not fall. So be it. Thorne spat. He dropped his saber, pointing it forward. Charge. The world exploded. The blue line surged forward with a roar. Carbines barking, bullets whined and ricocheted off the rocks around Tayo. He saw one of his men, a young man named Claw, clutch his chest and fall backward without a sound. Fire! Tayo yelled. The Navajo answer was a ragged volley of shots and a hiss of arrows. Horses screamed. A soldier fell, his horse tumbling over him. The charge faltered, breaking around the rocks like water around a boulder. The soldiers dismounted, taking cover, and the real fight began. It was a brutal, close thing. The soldiers were well armed, disciplined, but Tayo and his men were fighting for their homes. They knew the land. They moved like shadows, firing, then shifting position, making their small numbers seem like more. Tayo fought with a cold, precise deadliness. He did not waste a bullet. Every shot was a prayer and a curse. He saw a soldier trying to flank their position, to get a clear shot at the river. Tayo dropped him with a shot to the leg. He heard a man shout in pain to his left. He saw another soldier go down, an arrow sprouting from his throat. For an hour, they held them. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of blood and fear. Miles away, the same sun beat down on Alma's homestead. She had seen the smoke first, a dark pillar rising from the direction of the Navajo village. Her heart had tightened. Trouble. Then she saw the smaller plume, much closer. Smoke from the west, from her neighbor Jedediah's farm. She had just grabbed her shotgun when she heard them. A smaller detachment, maybe a dozen men, split off from the main column. They were not charging. They were moving with a grim efficiency. They were not here to parley. Their leader was a sergeant, a big man with a red, brutal face. "Silas!" Alma yelled, running back to the cabin. "Get in the root cellar, now! Do not come out. Do not make a sound. You hear me?" The boy's face was white. He nodded, grabbing his slate, and scrambled for the trap door in the floor. Alma slid it shut over him, throwing a worn rug over it. She grabbed the shotgun, her father's old rifle, and a box of shells. She went to the window, her hands steady. She was a woman alone, but as she had told her brother, she was not weak. The soldiers trotted into her yard, their horses trampling her small vegetable garden. The sergeant dismounted. "This is army business," he yelled, not even looking at her directly, but at the cabin itself. "We are clearing this valley. You have 10 minutes to take what you can carry. This homestead is forfeit." "This is my land." Alma's voice came clear and cold from the window. "I have a deed, registered in town." The sergeant laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Your deed is worthless paper. Orders from Captain Thorne. All squatters and savages are to be removed. Now get out, or we burn you out." "I am not a squatter," and I am not moving." Alma said. The barrel of the shotgun appeared in the window, aimed squarely at the sergeant's chest. The man's eyes widened, then narrowed in fury. He had not expected this. "You are pointing a firearm at a soldier of the United States Army. Woman, that is a hanging offense. You are trespassing on my land and threatening my home. Sergeant, that is a shooting offense." She replied. For a long moment, there was silence. The sergeant looked at the dark window, then at his men. They were looking at him, waiting. He was not going to be held up by a lone woman. "Burn it," he growled. Two soldiers dismounted, pulling torches from their saddlebags. They began to light them. Alma's finger tightened on the trigger. She did not want to kill. It was a line she had never crossed, but they were going to burn her home, with her brother hidden beneath it. She aimed the shotgun at the ground in front of the sergeant's horse. She fired. The blast echoed across the small yard. The horse reared, screaming, throwing the sergeant into the dust. The other soldiers raised their carbines. "The next one is for you," Alma shouted. Grabbing the rifle, she was fast. She fired the rifle, the bullet kicking up dirt near the men with the torches, making them jump back. "She is crazy," one of them yelled. "Get her," the sergeant roared, climbing to his feet, his face purple with rage. "Shoot her! Shoot the crazy bitch!" Bullets tore into the wooden walls of the cabin. Wood splintered, flying into the room. Alma dropped to the floor, crawling away from the window. They were going to kill her. They were going to kill her and Silas. She was strong. She was smart, but she was one woman against 12 armed men. Her fight was hopeless, but she would not surrender. She crawled to the back window, ready to make them pay for every inch of her land. Back at the village, the tide was turning. The soldiers' superior numbers and endless ammunition were beginning to tell. Tayo's men were falling. He was down to 10, then 5. The rocks were no longer a fortress. They were a trap. The soldiers were massing for a final charge, this one on foot. Tayo knew it was over. They had bought time, but it was not enough. He looked back at the river. He had not heard any sounds from that direction. Good. The women and children were still hidden, but the soldiers would find them. Once they were done here, they would sweep the riverbank. He saw Side, the old man, appear at the edge of the trees. He was waving, signaling. He was motioning for Tayo to run, to join them, to escape with them down the river. Tayo looked at the charging soldiers, now only 100 yards away. He looked at the 3 men still fighting beside him, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, their rifles nearly empty. He looked at the river, where the future of his people cowered. His heart tore in two. If he stayed and fought, he would die. He would die a warrior's death, a death his ancestors would sing about. He would die with honor. But his death would not save his people. The soldiers would kill him, and then they would find the others. If he ran, he would live. He would live to be branded a coward, a man who ran from a fight while his friends died. He would live with the shame. But if he lived, perhaps he could guide the others to safety. Perhaps he could keep fighting, not for honor, but for survival. Protect the village or flee to protect the people. Fight for freedom or run for a chance at a future. The soldiers raised their voices in a final, terrifying yell. The charge was coming. Tayo made his choice. It was a choice that felt like swallowing poison. "Run!" he yelled to his last 3 men. "To the river go! That is an order!" He fired his last bullet at the charging line. Not to kill, but to make them pause. He saw one of the soldiers stumble. Then he turned and ran. He did not run like a warrior. He ran like a deer, zigzagging, his body low to the ground. He heard the bullets follow him, snapping at his heels. He heard one of his men scream as he was cut down. He did not look back. He plunged into the thicket of cottonwoods, the sound of the soldiers' triumphant shouts filling his ears, the taste of ash and bitter failure in his mouth. He had chosen. He had chosen to live. And he already hated himself for it. The world was a chaos of splintering wood and the flat, terrifying crack of carbines. Alma fell to the floor, the air thick with plaster dust, as bullets ripped through the thin walls of her home. She heard the sergeant roaring outside, his voice thick with rage. Get her now, we will burn this shack to the ground with her in it." She scrambled toward the back of the cabin, the shotgun heavy in her hands. She knew this was the end. They would not be stopped by a few shots. They would rush the house, or set it alight. And Silas was beneath the floorboards. The thought of him, trapped and terrified, sent a fresh wave of cold fury through her. She would not let them. She would take as many of them with her as she could. She reached the back window, peered over the sill, and saw two of them dismounting, torches in hand again, moving toward the side of the cabin. She raised the shotgun. She aimed at the knee of the closest man. Before she could pull the trigger, a sound cut through the air, high and clear and brassy, a bugle call. It was distant, coming from the east, from the direction of the Navajo village. It was a rally, a recall. The men in her yard froze. The sergeant turned his head, listening. The bugle call came again, more insistent. "Damn it," the sergeant roared. He looked at the cabin, his face a mask of thwarted bloodlust. He looked back toward the pillar of smoke. "Damn that thorn." "Sergeant," one of his men asked, lowering his carbine. "Orders." The sergeant stared at the cabin for a long, hateful moment. Alma held her breath, the shotgun still leveled. He wanted to finish this. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. But he was a soldier. He would obey. "Mount up," he snarled. "We are moving out." He kicked the dirt, then hauled himself onto his horse. He pointed one thick finger at the cabin. "This is not over, woman. We will be back for this land and for you." His men mounted, their torches thrown to the ground. They wheeled their horses, trampling what was left of her garden, and galloped away, a tight, angry knot of blue uniforms heading east. Alma did not move. She listened until the sound of their hooves was gone, completely swallowed by the vast, empty silence of the plains. Only then did she lower the shotgun. Her arms were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her legs trembling. She was alive. They were alive. "Silas," she called, her voice a reedy whisper. The trapdoor pushed open, and her brother's head emerged. His face was streaked with dust and tears. "Alma, are they gone?" "They are gone," she said, her voice stronger. "Come out. We are safe." He scrambled out and ran to her, burying his face in her shoulder. She held him tight, stroking his hair, her eyes closed. The cabin was a wreck. The walls were full of holes. Glass from the broken window was everywhere. But it was still standing. They were still alive. Meanwhile, Tayo had plunged into the cottonwoods, his lungs burning. He found the terrified knot of survivors huddled in a deep, dry wash. Tside was there, his face grim, along with 24 women and children. The sounds of the soldiers rampaging through the village were hideously clear. Shouts, gunfire, the shattering of pottery. "They are burning the Hogans," a young woman whispered, her voice breaking. Tayo did not let them grieve, not yet. "We must move," he said. His voice was hollow, dead in his own ears. "They will sweep the river next. We must go, now. Stay in the water if you can. It leaves no tracks." He led them, a broken, stumbling exodus. They moved through the shallows, the cold water numbing their feet. Children whimpered, and their mothers quieted them with desperate hands. Tayo moved at the rear, his rifle ready, his eyes constantly scanning the trees behind them. He felt like a wolf, but a wolf whose pack was scattered, a wolf who had failed. They had not gone half a mile when he heard it, the sound of men crashing through the brush. Not a large group, a patrol. Thorn was thorough. He was sweeping the river. "Keep moving," he hissed to Side. "Do not stop. Do not look back. Lead them south, as fast as they can go." "Tayo, what will you do?" the old man asked, grabbing his arm. "What I should have done before," Tayo said. He pulled his arm free. "I will buy you time. The time I failed to buy before. This is foolishness. It is your death." "Then it is my death," Tayo said. "Go! Protect them!" He gave the old man a shove. "Go!" Side looked at him, his old eyes filled with a terrible understanding. He nodded once, then turned to the group, urging them on. Tayo turned back. He checked his rifle. 4 bullets. He had taken them from Claw's pouch as he ran. 4 bullets for his honor. He found a place, a thick tangle of ancient roots at a bend in the river. It gave him a clear view of the bank for 50 yards. He settled in. He waited. He was not a man anymore. He was an ending. The soldiers came. 4 of them. They were moving quickly, carelessly, flush with victory. Tayo waited until the first man was 20 yards away. He aimed for the center of the blue coat. He fired. The man fell forward into the water with a heavy splash. The other 3 dove for cover, shouting in surprise. "Where is he, damn it? Where did that come from?" Upstream by the bend. A bullet tore bark from the root above Tayo's head. He did not flinch. He saw a flash of blue as one of the soldiers tried to move to a better position. Tayo fired his second bullet. A scream. 2 men left. They were smarter now. They stayed down. One began to lay down a steady, covering fire, sending bullets smashing into the root tangle, forcing Tayo to keep his head down. The other, he knew, would be moving, circling. Tayo waited. The shooting from the front stopped. He heard a twig snap. To his right. No, behind him. He spun, bringing the rifle around. He was too late. The soldier was already on him. A big man with a thick beard and merciless eyes. He did not fire. He swung his rifle like a club. The heavy wooden stock caught Tayo on the side of the head. White light exploded behind Tayo's eyes. The world tilted. He fell to his knees, his rifle dropping from his numb fingers. As he fell, the soldier lunged, not with the club, but with the blade. The bayonet, slick and triangular, slid deep into Tayo's right side, just below the ribs. It was a sickening, tearing sensation, a fire that stole his breath. He grunted, a sound of animal pain. The soldier wrenched the blade free and raised his rifle, the butt high, ready to smash Tayo's skull. "Harkins!" a shout came from the trees. "Leave him, bugles sounded. The captain is moving out. We are to regroup." The soldier, Harkins, stood over Tayo, his chest heaving. He was breathing hard. He spat, a thick glob of tobacco juice landing on Tayo's chest. "Your luck," he growled. Then he was gone, crashing back through the trees, his boots heavy in the mud. Tayo lay on his side. The pain in his head was a dull thunder. The pain in his side was a sharp, rising fire. He tried to move, but his limbs would not obey. He looked at the water flowing past, dark and cold. He could see the sky, a perfect, empty blue. He thought of his people, fleeing down the river. He had bought them time. He had bought it with his own life. This, at least, was a good death. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. He woke to pain, and to a smell, wood smoke, and sage. He was not by the river. The ground was not cold mud. It was soft, a cot. He tried to open his eyes. The light was dim, but it still hurt. He was in a small room, the walls made of wood. He heard a soft sound, someone moving. He tried to sit up. Agony, bright and absolute, ripped through his side. A low groan was torn from his throat. "Be still." The voice was a woman's, not one of his people. The language was the white man's. "You will tear your stitches." A figure moved into the low light from a single lantern. A woman. He saw her face, pale in the shadows. Her hair the color of dried grass. Her eyes were gray, like the sky before a storm. Tayo's hand flew to his belt, searching for the knife that was not there. His body betrayed him, and the movement sent another wave of sickness and pain through him. "Easy," the woman said. Her voice was steady. There was no fear in it. "Your weapons are over there. You are in no condition to use them, and I am in no mood to be threatened." He stared at her, his mind a fog. "Where?" "My home, or what is left of it," she said. She held a metal cup in her hand. "You have been here 2 days. I found you by the river. You were bleeding to death." "Soldiers," he rasped, his throat dry. "They are gone. For now." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "They attacked your village. I saw the smoke. Then they attacked my home. They seem to enjoy their work." "My people," he whispered. The word was in agony. "I do not know," she said, and he knew she was telling the truth. "I found you. You were alone. You were dying." He looked down. His side was heavily bandaged, clean white cloth. His head throbbed, and he could feel a bandage there. "Two." Why? It was the only word he could find. The woman, Alma, came closer. She knelt by the cot. She was not a soft woman. He could see the calluses on her hands. He could see the hard resolve in her face. This was a woman who had fought. "I told you," she said. "They attacked me, too. They burned my neighbor's farm. They kill your people. They try to kill me. To them, we are the same. We are just in the way. They are the enemy. Not you, not me. Them." She held out the cup. "It is broth. Drink it." He tried to push himself up, but he was as weak as a newborn kitten. The shame of it was as sharp as the pain. He, Tayo, a warrior, could not lift his own head. Gently, but firmly, she put a hand behind his shoulders and helped him. Her touch was strong. She held the cup to his lips. He was too weak to resist. He drank. The broth was hot and salty. It tasted like life. He drank it all. She eased him back down. "You are safe here," she said, "but you are in danger. They will come back. They always come back." "They will find me," he said. "They will hurt you." "They will hurt me anyway," Alma said, standing up. "They want my land. Now. You sleep. You need to heal. We are no good to anyone dead." She turned and walked out of the small room, leaving him alone in the dim light. He stared at the wooden ceiling. A white woman. An enemy. She had fought the soldiers. She had saved him. The world, which had been so simple an hour ago, was now a confusing, painful maze. He had run, he had failed. He had sought a warrior's death and been denied it, and he had been saved by one of the people he had sworn to fight. He closed his eyes. The shame was a sickness in his stomach. He was grateful to be alive, and he hated himself for it. He was safe, in a bed, while his people were out in the wilderness, hunted. The conflict was a tearing in his soul, worse than the bayonet wound in his side. He was a warrior in name only. He was a failure, and he owed his life to a white woman. He fell back into a troubled sleep, the fever and the shame wrestling for his soul. He measured his recovery in days, then in steps. The first 3 days were a fevered blur of pain, broth, and the woman's steady, impersonal care. He would wake in a sweat, the ghosts of the battle vivid behind his closed eyes, the feeling of the bayonet a fresh, tearing agony. She would be there, wiping his face with a cool, damp cloth. "Be still," she would say, her voice calm. The fever must break. On the 4th day, the fever did break. He woke, his mind clear, his body weak but his own. The pain in his side was a deep, dull ache, no longer a fire. He saw the boy, Silas, watching him from the doorway of the small room. The boy's eyes were wide, a mixture of fear and a startling, intense curiosity. He held a piece of slate in his hand. When Tayo's eyes met his, the boy vanished like a rabbit. On the 5th day, Tayo sat up. The effort left him dizzy, but he did it. Alma came in, her face showing no surprise. She was patching a bullet hole in the main room's wall with a mixture of mud and straw. "You are healing fast," she said. It was not a compliment, just a fact. She carried a bowl. "More broth." "I need meat," he said, his voice still rough. She almost smiled. "Tomorrow, if you can stand." On the 6th day, he stood. He used the wall for support, his legs trembling like a newborn foal's. He looked at his own body. He was gaunt. The wound in his side was a raw, puckered mouth, stitched together with black thread. Her work. It was clean. It was neat. He pushed himself away from the wall and took a step, then another. He made his way to the doorway of the main room. The cabin was a ruin. The sunlight streamed in through a dozen new holes. The one window was boarded up. Alma was at the table, cleaning her shotgun, the pieces laid out on an oilcloth. Silas was beside her, sketching on his slate. "You should be resting," Alma said, not looking up. "You saved my life," Tayo said. She paused, her hand still. "I stopped you from bleeding to death. There is a difference." "Why?" he asked again. This time, she did look up. Her gray eyes were clear and held no pity. "I told you, the soldiers, they are my enemy too. But it was more than that. I could not leave you. Not like that. It was not right." She nodded toward the wall. "They did this. They tried to kill me. They tried to kill my brother. They do not see people. They just see obstacles." He saw Silas's drawing. It was a good drawing. It was a man on a horse, a soldier, his face twisted in a snarl. It was the sergeant. "He has talent," Tayo said, nodding at the slate. Silas flushed and looked down. Alma put a hand on his shoulder. "He is all I have left. This land is all we have left. A man named Harrison wants our water. The bank in town wants our money. The soldiers, they just want everything." Tayo looked at her. He saw the exhaustion around her eyes, the hard set of her jaw. She was a warrior. She had no band, no weapons, but she was fighting. She was fighting for her kin and her land, just as he had, but she had not run. He felt the shame rise, hot and bitter. "I must go," he said. "I am strong enough." "No," she said, flatly. "You are not. You can barely stand. You walk out that door. You will be dead in a day, from the wound, or the sun, or from Harrison's men. They ride this range. They would shoot you for sport." "My people," he began. "Are they alive?" she asked. The question hit him like a stone. I think so. I sent them south, down the river." "Then they are hiding," she said, her voice practical. "They are finding a place to be safe. You are no good to them dead. You are no good to them weak. You will eat, you will get strong, then you will go." He had no answer. She was right. He was a warrior who could not lift his own rifle. He sat at the table, his head bowed. The shame was a physical weight. For another week, he stayed. He did as she said. He ate. He walked, first inside the cabin, then in the small yard, under the cover of the night. He watched her work. She was tireless. She and Silas repaired the walls. She mended her fences again. She never seemed to rest. They spoke, but not of the battle. He asked about the land. She told him about the water, where the springs were, how the cattle grazed. He found he was listening. He told her about hunting. He taught Silas how to set a snare, a small one, for rabbits. The boy watched him with rapt attention, his fear slowly turning to a kind of hero worship. On the 14th day, Tayo knew he could wait no longer. He was strong. The wound was healing, the ache a part of him. He found Alma by the sorry remains of her garden, where she was trying to salvage a few squash plants. "I am leaving," he said. She stood up, wiping her hands on her trousers. She looked at him, really looked at him. He was no longer the half-dead man she had dragged from the river. He was tall, his strength returned, his presence filling the small yard. But his eyes were still haunted. "I know," she said. She walked to the cabin and came back out. She carried his rifle. It was clean, oiled. She also had his knife and his empty ammunition belt. She held them out to him. "You will need these." He took them, his fingers wrapped around the familiar wood and steel. The feel of them was a comfort and a burden. "I have no way to pay you," he said. "You do not owe me anything," she said. "We have a common enemy. That is payment enough." "It is not," he said. "I am in your debt." "Then stay alive," she said, her voice sharp. "Stay alive and fight them. That is how you can pay me." She had also packed a small bag of food. Jerky, hardtack, a skin of water. He took it. He stood before her, a warrior ready for a war he did not know how to fight. "They will come back," he said, "for you." "I know, I will be ready," she said. He nodded once. He turned and walked away. He did not look back. He found his people. It took him 2 days of hard tracking, moving only at night. He found them in the way he knew he would, by following the trail of their fear. They were hidden in a high, narrow canyon, a place they had used as a refuge for generations. But it was not a refuge. It was a trap. When he walked into the small camp, a gasp went up. Children ran to their mothers. Sita was the first to see him. The old man's face, etched with grief, broke into a look of disbelief, then joy. "Tayo," he cried, grasping his arm. "By the spirits, you are alive." The welcome from the others was not so warm. He saw Haska, a man his own age, a man whose brother, Kla, had died at the rocks. Haska's eyes were flat, cold. "You live," Hask said. It was not a question. It was an accusation. Tayo ignored him, his eyes scanning the camp. It was bad. They were starving. They had run with nothing. There were perhaps 15 families, all that was left. "We must fight," Tayo said, his voice quiet, but carrying in the small, tight space. The word hung in the air. "Fight!" Haska stepped forward. His voice was a raw whisper of fury. "Fight! We fought, my brother fought, and where were you? Tayo, I saw you. We all saw you. You ran while Claude died. You ran like a coyote." The word struck Tayo. He flinched, but he held his ground. "I ran to lead you, to lead the women, the children." "You ran to save yourself," Haska shouted. "And now you, the ghost, you come back and ask us to fight to die for what? For your honor you have no honor. You left it at the rocks with my brother's blood." A murmur went through the small crowd. They were afraid. They were hungry. And Haska's words made a terrible kind of sense. "Haska is right," an old woman said, her voice thin. "The fighting is over. The white man is too strong. We must go to the reservation. They will feed us. It is the only way." "The reservation is a prison," Tayo said, his voice pleading. "It is a slow death." "This," Haska said, waving his arm at the starving children, at the weeping women. "This is a fast death. I will not lead my family to be slaughtered because you want to play warrior again." Tayo looked at the faces around him. He saw no fight in them. He saw only fear and hunger and a deep bone weariness. His own shame, his own doubt, came flooding back. Haske was right. Who was he to lead them? He was the man who had run. He had no answer. He turned and walked away, to the edge of the camp, his new purpose dissolving like smoke. Alma rode to Crossroads. She had to. They were out of flour, out of salt, and she needed to know. She needed to know if the soldiers were truly gone. She rode with her shotgun across her lap, her eyes scanning every ridge. The town was quiet, too quiet. She tied her horse outside the general store and went inside. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, peered at her over his glasses. "Miss Alma," he said, his voice low, "you should not be here." "I need supplies, Mr. Henderson," she said. "They are in town," he whispered, his eyes flicking to the saloon across the street. "The soldiers, Captain Thorne and his command, they are celebrating." Alma's blood ran cold. She bought her flour and salt, her hands steady, her mind racing. As she left the store, she heard them, laughter, loud and drunken, spilling from the saloon. Captain Thorne himself stood on the porch, a whiskey glass in his hand. "A fine piece of work, Captain," a man, Harrison, was saying. She recognized his large frame, his expensive hat. "Just clearing the trash," Thorne said. His voice slurred but clear. "We hit the savage village, burned them out. We will finish the job soon enough. We are just waiting on a supply wagon from the fort. Should be here in 2 days. Then we will sweep this entire valley clean. All of it." "Good," Harrison said. "There are some squatters that need clearing, too, a stubborn one, out west of here." "All of it," Thorne repeated, drinking his whiskey. "This land will be fit for white men by the time I am done." Alma did not wait to hear more. She mounted her horse and rode out of town, not galloping, but moving at a steady, calm pace. She did not want to draw attention. Once she was over the first rise, she kicked her horse into a hard run. She did not go to her homestead. She went south. She rode for a day and a half. She risked everything. She was a white woman, alone, riding into the wild. But she did not hesitate. She had to tell him. She found the canyon, the Navajo sentries, 2 young boys with bows, stepped out, their arrows aimed at her heart. She raised her hands. "I am here to see Tayo," she said, her voice dry with dust. They looked at her, then at each other. One of them ran back into the camp. A moment later, Tayo appeared. His face was a mask of utter shock. He could not believe what he was seeing. "Alma," he said, his voice full of disbelief. "They are coming back," she said, breathing hard from her ride. She slid from her horse. "Captain Thorne, he is in Crossroads. He is waiting for a supply wagon. In 2 days. Then he is coming to sweep the valley. To finish the job. He means to kill you all." The camp was silent. Every eye was on her. Haskell stepped forward, his face dark. "A white woman," he spat. "You bring her here. She is a spy." "She is a friend," Tayo said, his voice hard. He looked at Alma, and in that moment, his shame fell away. She had risked her life for them. For him. "She saved my life, and she just risked it again to bring us this—" He turned to Hask, his eyes blazing with a new fire, a fire she had lit. "You said there was no hope. You said to run, but she has given us hope. She has given us a target. Thorne is at 2 Rivers, waiting. He is exposed. We will not wait for him to come to us. We will go to him." That night, she stayed. The camp was too dangerous to leave in the dark. They gave her a blanket, and she sat by a small, smokeless fire, Tayo beside her. The rest of the camp was asleep, or pretending to be. "You should not have come," he said, his voice low. "I know," she said, "but I had to." He was silent for a long time. The stars were brilliant in the narrow slot of sky above them. "They say I ran," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "that I am a coward. They are right." "No," she said. "You are alive. You are here. You are ready to fight. That is not a coward." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face in the dim light. "Why did you save me?" "I told you," she said. "No," he said. "Tell me the truth." She looked away, at the small fire. My father, he was a good man. He believed in this land. He always said, you do not turn your back on someone in need, no matter who they are. When I saw you, all I saw was a man who needed help. And when the soldiers came, when they shot at my home, I hated them. I hated them for what they were doing to you and what they were doing to me. I guess I saw that we were the same, just people trying to live. He watched her. He had never heard a white person speak like this. He had only known them as liars and killers. This woman had saved his life, had shared her food, had risked herself to warn his people. He told her, then he told her about the long walk, the years of cold and hunger. He told her about being a scout, the shame of wearing the blue coat, of leading the soldiers, believing he was helping. He told her about the battle, about the moment he turned and ran, the faces of his men as they died. He spoke of his ghosts. He emptied his heart to her. In the dark, in the quiet canyon. She listened. She did not judge. She did not offer words of comfort. She just listened. And when he was finished, the silence was heavy, but clean. Then she spoke. My mother died 4 years ago. Fever. I held her hand. She was so cold. My father, he just broke. He kept working, but the light was gone from his eyes. He fell from the barn roof 2 years ago. I do not know if it was an accident. I have been alone with Silas. I am afraid all the time. Tayo, I am afraid of Harrison. I am afraid of the bank. I am afraid of being alone. But I am too stubborn to break. That is all it is. I am just too stubborn. He looked at her, this woman who carried her own ghosts, her own terrible burdens. He saw her, not as a white woman, but as a person, strong, brave, and as lonely as he was. He reached out, his calloused fingers hesitating, then gently touched the back of her hand, where it rested on her knee. Her skin was rough from work. She did not pull away. She turned her hand, her fingers lightly grasping his. They sat like that for a long time, the fire dwindling to embers. The rising action was complete. A plan was formed, born of her information. A bond was formed, born of their shared pain. The path ahead was dark, but for the first time in years, Tayal did not feel like he was walking it alone. The sun rose, painting the high canyon walls a brutal, sharp red. The light spilled onto the canyon floor, finding the small, huddled camp and the dying embers of the fire. Alma woke with a start, her hand still loosely holding his. She pulled it back quickly, as if burned. In the cold, clear light of morning, the intimacy of the night before felt dangerous, impossible. Tayo was already awake, watching her. His face was unreadable in the new light, his eyes dark. The camp was stirring, the sounds of people coughing, of children whimpering with hunger, cut through the quiet. I must go, Alma said, her voice a low murmur. She scrambled to her feet, brushing dust from her trousers. Silas, he will be terrified. I know, Tayo said. He, too, stood, his tall frame unfolding. The warrior had returned. The broken man from the night before was gone, replaced by a cold, focused energy. It is not safe for you to ride alone. It is not safe for me here, she replied, her gaze flicking to the other Navajo who were now watching them. She saw curiosity in some faces, but in others, like Husk, she saw a deep, cold suspicion. He stood by his blanket, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on her. He saw her not as a savior, but as a poison. I will take you clear of the canyon, Tayo said. It was not a request. He spoke briefly to Tside, his voice low, giving instructions. The old man nodded, his eyes troubled, but he did not argue. Tayo retrieved his rifle and his pony. He looked at Alma, his face grim. Let us ride. They rode in silence, Tayo leading his pony. Alma hers, through the twisting, narrow exit of the canyon. The air was cool, the world quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath. Once they were on the open plain, concealed by a shallow arroyo. He stopped. "I can go no further. I must prepare." Alma nodded. She turned to face him, her horse shifting nervously beneath her. "Tayo, what you are doing? It is suicide. You cannot mean to attack a military wagon. They will be armed. They will be ready." "They will not be ready for us," he said. "They are in the town. They are drinking. They are arrogant. They will send a small guard. Nothing more. They think we are broken. They think we are fleeing." "You do not know that," she insisted, her voice desperate. She had brought him this information, and now it felt like she had handed him a death sentence. "It is a guess. You have 15, maybe 20 men. They have rifles and an army." "It is our only chance," he said, his voice flat. "If we do not stop those supplies, Thorn will have all he needs. He will hunt us down. He will sweep this valley, just as he said. He will kill my people. And then, when he is done, he will come for you, and for Silas. There is no running. Alma, not anymore. I tried that. It does not work." His words were true, but the finality of them chilled her. She looked at his face, at the hard lines of it, the mouth that had softened for a fleeting moment last night, now set like stone. She saw the scar on his head, the way his hand rested on his rifle. He was a man going to his death, and the thought of it was an agony she had not expected. "And what if you fail?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "What if you die?" He looked at her, and, for a moment, the warrior vanished. She saw the man by the fire. She saw the ghosts in his eyes, the deep, aching loneliness that mirrored her own. "Then I will die," he said, his voice so quiet she barely heard him. "But I will die fighting. I will not die a coward. Running in the mud. I will not die in the cage they call a reservation. I will die here, on my own land, a free man." This was the choice he had made. He had to do this, not just for his people, but for himself. To burn away the shame of his first flight. He was choosing his end. She looked at him, and her heart broke. All the rules of her world, the expectations, the lines drawn between his people and hers, they all seemed like a sickness, a lie. This was a man, a good man, a brave man, and he was being forced into a grave by a world that had no place for him. "You are not a coward, Tayo," she said, her voice fierce. "Do not say that. You are the bravest man I have ever known." He did not seem to hear her. He was looking at her mouth. The air between them became thick, charged. He took a step closer. His hand came up, not to his rifle, but to her face. His fingers were rough, calloused from a life of war and work, but his touch was hesitant, almost gentle. He cupped her jaw. "You should not have come," he said. "You have put yourself in the deepest danger. By helping us, you have made yourself an enemy. They will not forgive you." "I am already their enemy," she said, her voice trembling. "They came to my home. They tried to kill me. You said it. We are the same." He looked into her gray eyes, eyes that had seen so much loss, yet held so much strength. He saw his own pain reflected there. He saw a mirror. He was torn. His duty was to his people, to the raid, to the cold, hard logic of war. But this woman was life. She was the first warmth he had felt in years. She was a future he had never dared to imagine. To love her was a weakness. It made him want to live. And to want to live was a terrible thing for a man who had to be willing to die in the next 24 hours. His duty pulled him one way, his heart another. He felt a savage tear within him. He was a Navajo warrior. She was a white woman. This was impossible. This was madness. He leaned in. He did not know why he was doing it. He only knew he had to. Alma saw him coming. Her own mind was screaming. This was wrong. This was forbidden. This was dangerous. If anyone saw, They would call her an Indian lover. They would run her out or kill her. It was a line from which there was no return. She was a woman alone. Her reputation was all she had to protect her. But as his face drew closer, she did not care. She did not care about the town, or Harrison, or the rules. Her heart was pounding, a heavy, slow drum against her ribs. She felt his breath on her skin. She raised her own hand, gripping the front of his worn shirt, as if to steady herself. And then his lips were on hers. It was not a gentle kiss, it was a collision. It was desperate and rough and full of a terrible, aching sadness. His lips were chapped, and he tasted of dust and the faint, bitter smoke of the canyon fire. He kissed her as a dying man might drink water, with a raw, consuming need. His hand tightened on her jaw, holding her steady, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. She kissed him back. She poured all of her fear, her loneliness, her stubborn anger into it. Her fingers clenched his shirt. She felt the hard muscle of his chest beneath the cloth. She felt the strength of him, a strength she had longed for, a strength that matched her own. It was a kiss of goodbye. It was a kiss of hello. It was the only thing that made sense in a world gone mad. It was two lonely people, in a vast, uncaring land, finding a moment of shelter in each other. He pulled away, his breath coming hard. His eyes were blazing. He looked at her, his expression a storm of conflict. He had done it. He had tasted life, and now he had to walk away from it, into the shadow of death. The choice was made. His duty was clear, but now it was infinitely harder.
"Go, Alma,"
he said, his voice thick.
"Go back to Silas. Bar your door. Load your shotgun. Do not leave your land for any reason. Do not look for me. Do not wait for me."
"Tayo," she whispered, her hand still on his shirt.
"Go,"
he commanded. He grabbed her hand and pulled it away, gently but with a terrible finality. He stepped back from her, turning himself back into stone. Alma's heart was tearing. She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg him not to go, but she saw the resolve in his eyes. She was a fighter. So was he. This was his fight. She nodded once, her throat too tight to speak. She pulled her horse's head around. She kicked it into a run, riding hard to the east, toward her home. She did not look back, because she knew if she did, she would fall apart. The tears streamed down her face, whipped away by the wind. Invisible in the dust, she was in love with him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was in love with a Navajo warrior, and she had just sent him off to die. Tayo watched her until she was just a small speck, swallowed by the dust and the distance. He stood there for a long time, his hand, the one that had touched her face, held open at his side. He could still feel her skin. He could still taste her. A cold rage settled over him. It was not the hot anger of battle. It was a deep, cold fury. They had taken everything from him, his family, his home, his honor. And now, they were threatening the one impossible thing that made him want to live. He turned his pony and rode back toward the canyon. His conflict was resolved. It was no longer love versus duty. The two had become one. He was fighting for his duty because he loved. He was fighting for his people. But he was also fighting for her. He was fighting for a future. A world where a man like him and a woman like her could exist. He was fighting for the right to live, for the right to breathe, for the right to that one. Impossible moment, stolen from a dying world. When he rode back into the camp, Haska was waiting, his face a thundercloud. "You were gone a long time," Hask said, his voice accusing, "saying goodbye to your white woman." Tayo dismounted. He walked straight up to Haske until they were chest to chest. Tayo was taller, his presence radiating a new, deadly calm. "She risked her life to save ours," Tayo said, his voice low and dangerous. "She is more of a warrior than you are. You see only her skin. You are a fool. Haska's hand went to his knife. You dishonor me. You dishonor your people by bringing her here. I honor my people by fighting. Tayo said, You honor them only with bitter words. You can stay here in this canyon and wait for Thorn to come and slaughter you. You can wait for your children to starve. I am going to fight. I am going to fight for the future. Those who are warriors, those who are dying, will ride with me. The cowards can stay here and die. He pushed past Hask. He did not look back. He began to prepare his weapons. The debate was over. The time for talk was done. Alma reached her homestead. The cabin was quiet, just as she had left it. She burst through the door, calling his name, Silas, Silas. He came scrambling out from his hiding place, his face pale with relief. Alma, you came back. I was so scared. I heard a horse last night. I thought it was them. She grabbed him and held him, so tightly he grunted. I am here. I am here. It is all right. I am not leaving you again. She barred the door. She went to the window, the one that was boarded up, and peered through a crack. She looked to the south, toward the high canyons. Then she looked to the east, toward crossroads. She was trapped between them. She had made her choice. She had allied herself with Tayo. She was, in the eyes of her own people, a traitor. She was in more danger than she had ever been. But as she stood there, her brother safe behind her, the memory of that kiss, of his touch, gave her a strength she did not know she possessed. She was no longer just a stubborn woman, fighting for a piece of land. She was a woman in love, and that made her the most dangerous thing in the whole, wide, terrible country. She picked up her shotgun. She sat in the chair by the window, and she began to wait. The waiting was a kind of poison. Alma sat by the boarded-up window, her shotgun across her lap. Every gust of wind was the sound of horses. Every shadow was a soldier. Silas sat at the table, trying to sketch, but his hands were shaking. He kept drawing the same thing, over and over the cabin, with flames coming from the windows. "Stop that," Alma said, her voice sharper than she intended. He flinched and put the slate down. "They are coming back, are they not?" "I do not know," Alma said. She had been saying that for 2 days. 2 days since she had left Tayo. 2 days of listening to the terrible, empty silence of the plains. She had barred the door, but she knew the flimsy wooden bar would not stop a determined man, let alone an army. On the morning of the 3rd day, she heard them. Horses. Not the steady, rhythmic drum of cavalry, but the ragged, shuffling sound of a dozen, maybe 15 riders. She peered through the crack in the boards. Her heart seized. It was not the blue of soldiers. It was Harrison. He rode his big bay horse, flanked by the same hard-faced men who had trailed her cattle and pushed down her fences. They rode into her yard as if they owned it, which, she thought, they soon intended to. "Silas," she said, her voice deadly calm. "Get in the cellar, now." "But, Alma—" "I said now," she hissed. He scrambled for the trap door. She did not bother to cover it. There was no time. She grabbed her father's rifle and stood by the door, the shotgun still in her other hand. "Alma," Harrison's voice boomed. It was a rich, confident sound. "Alma, my dear, I have come to make you a final offer." She said nothing. She just waited, her breathing shallow. "Do not be foolish, woman," he shouted, his good humor fading. "You are all alone out here. The army has cleared out those savages. Captain Thorne himself told me. The valley is safe now. Safe for civilized folk." He dismounted, his men fanning out around the cabin. "I am here to offer you $500 for this patch of dirt," he said. "That is more than generous. You and the boy can be on a stagecoach to St. Louis by the end of the week." "It is not for sale. Harrison," she called out, her voice clear. $500 is my last offer," he said. "The next one will be 0. I have men here who are not as patient as I am. And the bank in Crossroads,
Well, they seem to think your loan is past due. I bought the note this morning. Her blood ran cold.
He had her. He had won.
You have until I count to 3, he said. 1.
She knew what this meant. He would take her land. He would take her home. And he would likely take her, too. He was a man who took what he wanted.
2.
She looked at the barred door. She looked at the bullet-scarred walls. This was her home. She would not let him have it.
3, he yelled. Take the door, boys.
2 of his men ran forward with a heavy log they must have brought. Alma raised the shotgun, aimed at the door, and fired. The blast was deafening in the small cabin. Wood splintered. One of the men screamed as the heavy buckshot tore through the door and into his shoulder. He fell back, clutching his arm, howling.
The bitch shot him,
another man yelled.
Burn her out,
Harrison roared, his voice no longer smooth, but a savage snarl.
Burn it to the ground.
This was it, the moment she had dreaded. Bullets smashed into the cabin, a furious, sustained assault. She dropped to the floor, crawling to the back. She heard the crackle. She smelled the smoke. They had thrown their torches onto the dry wood of the porch.
Silas,
she screamed.
Silas, we have to go to the barn. We have to get to the barn.
She fired the rifle through the back window, making the men there duck for cover. The cabin was filling with smoke, thick and acrid. She unbarred the back door and pulled it open, grabbing Silas as he emerged from the cellar, his face streaked with tears and soot. "Run," she shrieked. They ran. They burst from the back door, a woman and a boy, into the bright, terrible sunlight. A bullet snapped past Alma's head. Another kicked up dust at Silas's feet. They ran for the barn. Their only hope. The horse was in there. They made it. They slammed the heavy barn doors shut just as Harrison's men came around the side of the burning cabin. Alma dropped the bar into place.
"They have trapped themselves," one of the men yelled.
"They have one horse, boss," another shouted, "and the barn's tinder dry." Alma ignored them. She ran to her horse, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unknot the rope. "Silas, get ready. We are riding out."
"Riding where?"
he sobbed.
"They are everywhere."
"We are riding through them," she said, her voice a low, fierce growl. She pulled the horse, a sturdy mare, toward the back of the barn, where a smaller, little-used set of doors opened out onto the east pasture. "They will not expect us to come from the back," she said. "When I open this, you climb up. You hold on to me. You hold on, Silas, as if your life depends on it, because it does. Do you hear me? Ooh." He nodded, his eyes wide with terror. She could hear them outside the main doors, shouting, preparing to set the barn on fire. She led the mare to the back doors. She took a deep breath. She pulled the pin and threw the doors wide. For a second, no one moved. 2 of Harrison's men were there, just dismounting, ready to light their torches. They gaped, surprised. Alma used that second. She threw Silas onto the horse's back, then leaped up behind him, her legs gripping the mare's sides. She had no saddle. She grabbed a handful of mane and the shotgun. "Ride!" she screamed, kicking the mare hard. The horse leaped forward. As terrified as they were, Alma fired the shotgun into the air. The 2 men dove aside. The mare was at a full gallop in 3 strides, racing away from the burning cabin, away from the barn, away from her life. "Get them!" she heard Harrison roaring behind her. "Do not let them get away." "Horses! They were coming!" She looked over her shoulder. 4 of them. They were gaining. Her mare was strong, but she was carrying 2. They would be run down and killed in the open. "Where are we going?" Silas shrieked, his arms locked around her waist. There was only one place, one person, one desperate, impossible hope. "Hold on," she yelled, and turned the mare south, toward the high canyons. She rode for hours. She pushed the mare until its sides were heaving, covered in foam. She did not slow. Behind her, Harrison's men were still coming. They were slower now, their horses tiring, but they were relentless. The land began to change, rising, breaking into arroyos and canyons. She knew she was close. She did not know if she was a fool. She was riding for a man who was probably already dead. She was leading her pursuers to a camp full of hunted people. Then she heard it, not the sound of her pursuers. A new sound. Gunfire. Not the scattered shots of a few men. It was a roar. A battle. She rounded a high wall of red rock and saw it, the canyon. But it was not a refuge. It was a war zone. Blue-coated soldiers were at the mouth of the canyon. A long line of them, firing up into the rocks. Others were trying to scale the sides, and from the rocks, a handful of Navajo warriors were returning fire. Smoke was everywhere. It was Thorn. He had found them. Her heart stopped. She had arrived. Not for refuge, but in the middle of the very battle Tayo had tried to prevent. "Alma!" a voice shrieked. Harrison. He and his men had come up behind her. They reined in, their eyes wide at the scene. "Look at that!" Harrison breathed, a slow, terrible smile spreading across his face. "The army, finishing the job. Well, it seems your savage friends are busy, my dear." He and his men dismounted, raising their rifles. They were not looking at her. They were looking up at the canyon, at the Navajo defenders. "Let us give the army a hand," Harrison said. High above, Tayo was fighting. He had led the raid on the supply wagon, and it had been a disaster. It had been a trap. Thorn had been waiting, his men hidden. Tayo and his warriors had ridden straight into an ambush. They had lost 3 men just getting away. And Thorn, his enemy's location confirmed, had followed them, relentless, trapping them in the high canyon. Now, they were dying. He had 20 men. Thorn had 100. They were fighting with a desperate, hopeless bravery. But it was only a matter of time. He was on a high ledge, directing his men, trying to stop the soldiers from scaling the walls. He heard the new gunfire, from the rear, from the plains below. He looked down, his blood turning to ice. He saw her. Alma. She was on a horse, with Silas, trapped between Harrison's men and the battle. He saw Harrison raise his rifle, not at her, but at Side, who was on a ledge not far from Tayo. "Alma." Tayo's voice was a raw tear in the sky. She heard him. She looked up, her face a pale oval of terror. She saw him, high on the rocks, a warrior king in his last, desperate castle. Harrison fired. The bullet whined past Side's head. Sida fired back, his old rifle bucking. "Get her!" Harrison yelled to his men, finally turning his attention to her. "Kill her and the boy! Kill them both!" Alma kicked her horse, trying to get to the cover of the rocks, but she was in the open, in the killing field. A bullet struck her. Tayo saw it. It hit her in the shoulder. A high, hard blow that spun her sideways. She cried out, a sharp sound of pain, and fell from the horse. Silas tumbled with her. "Alma!" Tayo screamed. She was on the ground. Silas was trying to pull her, to drag her to the rocks. Harrison was walking toward her, reloading his rifle, a smile on his face. Tayo had to choose. He was on the high ledge. The soldiers below were massing for a new charge, a charge that would take his position. His men were looking to him. He was their leader. If he left his post, the entire defense would collapse. His people, the women and children hidden in the caves deep in the canyon, would be slaughtered. His duty was clear. He had to stay. He had to command. He had to fight for his people. But Alma was on the ground, the woman he loved, the woman who had saved his life. She was wounded, and Harrison was walking toward her, his rifle ready, to finish her. He looked at the soldiers below. He looked at his men. He looked at Alma. To stay meant to save his people, but to sacrifice his heart. To go meant to save his heart, but to condemn his people. His choice, his love or his people, his honor or his life. He saw Harrison raise his rifle, aiming it at Alma's head. The choice was no choice at all. It was an animal roar of pure, absolute rage.
"Haske!"
he yelled, his voice echoing off the canyon walls.
"Hold the line, hold it, or we are all dead."
He did not wait for an answer. He turned from his post. He stood exposed on the high ledge, in full view of the soldiers, of Harrison, of everyone. He raised his rifle. He did not aim at Harrison. He aimed at the rock just above his head. He fired. The bullet smashed into the rock, sending a shower of stone chips down into Harrison's face. The man yelled, flinching, dropping his rifle to cover his eyes. And Tayo leaped. He did not climb down. He leaped from the ledge 20 feet to a sandy slope below, rolling, sliding, his body absorbing the terrible impact. He hit the canyon floor running, his knife in his hand, his rifle dropped. He was a streak of brown muscle and pure fury, racing across the open ground. The soldiers below, stunned by the sight, hesitated, their rifles half raised.
"It is Tayo,"
one of them yelled.
"Get him!"
Bullets snapped around him. He did not feel them. He did not hear them. He saw only Alma, and the man staggering, trying to clear his eyes. He hit Harrison like a boulder. The force of his charge sent both men tumbling. Harrison was a big man, but Tayo was a warrior. His knife flashed. He was not a man, he was a storm. He was the vengeance of the land itself. Alma, on the ground, her shoulder a fire of agony, watched him. She saw the man she loved, the quiet, haunted man, turn into something terrible and beautiful. He was fighting for her. He had chosen her. He stood up, his chest heaving, his knife red. Harrison did not move. Tayo ran to her. He fell to his knees beside her. "Alma, Alma!" His voice was choked. "Tayo," she whispered, her hand, her good hand, coming up to touch his face, his cheek streaked with blood and sweat. He looked at her wound. It was high, bloody, but it was not in her chest. She was alive.
"The soldiers!"
Silas screamed. Tayo looked up. The charge he had abandoned had failed. His men, inspired by his leap, had held the line. But now the soldiers, seeing him in the open, were turning their full attention to him. They were coming. They were running across the canyon floor. He was trapped. He was on the ground, with a wounded woman and a terrified boy. He had made his choice, and now they would all die together.
"Run!"
Alma gasped, her voice thin, her good hand pushing weakly against his chest. "Tayo, run! Save yourself! Take Silas! Go!"
"I am not running again,"
he said, his voice a low, hard growl. He was on his knees, a shield of his own body over hers, his knife still in his hand, red and wet. He looked up. The line of blue uniforms was only 50 yards away. A wave of men coming fast, their faces set, their bayonets glinting in the cruel sun. They were a machine. He was just a man. High above, on the ledge he had abandoned. Haske watched. He had seen Tayo leap, a suicidal, foolish drop. He had seen him choose the white woman over his post, over his people. A bitter contempt filled him. He ran before. Haske thought, and now he dies for her. But then he saw Tayo, a blur of motion, kill the big white man. He saw him kneel by the woman, defenseless, looking up at the charge. He had not run, he had not tried to escape. He had chosen, and he was staying to die for that choice. It was not cowardice. It was madness. It was magnificent. A bullet from below struck the rock near Haske's face, stinging his cheek with stone fragments. The soldiers were advancing, emboldened by the chaos. If they took the canyon floor, they would slaughter them all. Tayo's leap had not just saved the woman. It had saved them. He had drawn the soldiers' fire. "Warriors!" Haske's voice was a raw, new roar. a sound he did not know he possessed. Fire, fire on them. Do not let them take him. Fire for Tayo, fire. The remaining Navajo warriors, seeing their leader on the ground, seeing his impossible, suicidal bravery, were filled with a sudden, hot rage. It was a shared madness. They rose from the rocks, no longer hiding, no longer fighting a careful defense. They stood, exposed, pouring a desperate, chaotic fire down onto the charging soldiers. Arrows hissed, a deadly rain. Old rifles barked, their shots echoing like thunder in the narrow canyon. The charge broke, the blue line faltered, men screaming, clutching their chests, falling into the dust. The soldiers were trapped, exposed on the flat canyon floor, caught between the fire from the rocks above and the man they were trying to kill. The bugle sounded, a sharp, angry series of notes. Retreat. The soldiers pulled back, scrambling for the cover of the rocks at the canyon mouth, dragging their wounded with them. Tayo saw Captain Thorne, back with the main group, his face purple with rage. Thorne was shouting at his bugler, at his men, striking one of them with the flat of his saber. This was not a victory. It was a pause, a breath. Tayo did not waste it. He turned to Alma. Her shoulder was a dark, spreading stain. "Silas!" he commanded. The boy was frozen, his face a white mask of terror. "Silas, help me! Now!" He put his arms under Alma, lifting her. She cried out, a sharp, choked sound. Before she bit it back, he was weak from his old wound, but adrenaline was a fire in his veins. He dragged her, half-carried her, 20 feet to the only cover available. It was a grim barricade, the bodies of Harrison's dead horses, and the corpse of Harrison himself, his eyes open, staring at the sky he had tried to steal. "Stay down!" Tayo snarled at Silas, pushing the boy's head down behind the body of the horse. He laid Alma down as gently as he could. Her face was pale, clammy. "My cabin," she whispered, her eyes clouded with pain. "They burned it, Silas." "Hush," he said. His voice was rough, but his hands were surprisingly gentle. He ripped a strip of cloth from her torn shirt. He had to stop the bleeding. "Silas, your hand. Put it here, on this pad. Press hard. Do not let go." The boy, white-faced but no longer screaming, did as he was told, his small hands pressing down on the makeshift bandage. Tayo grabbed Harrison's rifle. It was a new model, a lever action, heavy and well-oiled. He checked the action. It was fully loaded. He peered over the dead horse. The soldiers were repositioning. He saw men scrambling up the rocks on the far side, trying to get a better angle. They were setting up for a siege. They would pick them off, one by one. He looked at the man he had killed, Harrison. The man's expensive coat was open. A heavy leather satchel was strapped across his chest. What did Harrison carry that was so important Tayo needed anything? Ammunition, a skin of water. He ripped the satchel from the dead man's body. He tore the flap open. Inside, there were papers, a stack of legal documents, tied with ribbon. He saw Alma's name on one. The deed to her land, the banknote Harrison had bought. But there was more. There was a map. It was not a hand-drawn sketch. It was an official Army surveyor's map, precise, detailed, covering the entire territory. He saw his own village, the one they had burned. It was marked with a thick, red X. But he also saw Tside's old village, 20 miles to the north, and the summer grazing lands, and the canyon where the spirits dwell, a place of ceremony. He saw the refuge canyon they were in, all marked. But they were not just marked. They had new names, written in a neat, black script. His village was labeled Proposed Dam Site. The summer grazing lands were Section 12 mining rights. Harrison. The sacred canyon was Township of Thorn. They were not just clearing the land. They were erasing it. They were stealing the names, the memories, the very soul of the land. Then he found the letter. It was folded in a long envelope. The seal, wax with a government eagle, was broken. It was addressed to Captain Thorne. Harrison must have been given it as proof of their agreement. Tayo's English, learned during his bitter years as a scout, was good. He read. His breath caught. Captain Thorne, it began. Your primary objective in the territory is the complete removal of the hostile element. Land clearance for Mr. Harrison's consortium is, while profitable, secondary to the strategic goal. He scanned the page, his eyes jumping, his heart turning to cold stone. Oh, it is imperative that the cultural centers are neutralized. The savages' reliance on these sacred sites is their primary weakness. Burn the ceremonial hogans, destroy the fields. The new school being constructed at Fort Defiance will educate the remaining children in the ways of God and industry. We must, by any means necessary, break their spirit. We are not just moving them. We are saving them from themselves. A Navajo who forgets his language, his gods, and his land is a Navajo who can be civilized. A dead one is, of course, equally civilized. See to it that this is concluded before the winter. He dropped the letter as if it were a snake. It was not a war for land. He had known that. It was not a war of greed. He had known that too, but this was a war for their souls. It was not just killing, it was unmaking. They were going to take the children. They were going to teach them to forget their mothers' tongues. They were going to burn the sacred places, not for the land they stood on, but to kill the memory they held. They were going to wipe the Dun from the memory of the earth, to make them a people who did not exist, a people who had never been. This was not a battle. This was an extermination. Tayo. Alma's voice was weak, pulling him back. She saw his face. It was a mask, carved from stone. His eyes black, filled with a depth of rage and despair she could not have imagined. What is it? What is wrong? He looked at her pale, pain-streaked face. He looked at Silas, a terrified white boy. He looked up at Hask, a Navajo warrior who hated him. And he looked at the soldiers, building their rock walls. They are not here to move us, he said, his voice a hoarse, terrible whisper. They are here to end us. He looked at the letter, at the map. He had been fighting for land. He had been fighting for revenge. He had been fighting, just moments ago, for his own honor, to not be the man who ran. Now he knew what he was fighting for. He was fighting for the songs of his grandfathers. He was fighting for the names of the mountains. He was fighting for the right of his people to exist, to be. A bullet chipped the rock just above his head, stinging his scalp with powder. A sniper. They were getting set. His resolve hardened. It became a thing of pure, cold iron. It was no longer a question of if he would die. It was a question of how he would die, and how many of them he would take with him. He was no longer fighting to win. He was fighting to survive. Not just his body, his entire world. "Silas," he said, his voice sharp. The boy looked at him, his eyes huge. "Take this." Tayo handed him Harrison's rifle. "You know how to use one of these." "A little," the boy whispered, his hands trembling as he took the heavy weapon. "My PA taught me." "Good. Do not shoot unless they are close. Do not lift your head," he ordered. He turned back to Alma. He tore another strip of cloth, this one from Harrison's fine linen shirt. He began to bind her wound tightly, his touch rough but efficient. She winced, biting her lip. "I am going to get you out of this," he said. "No," she said, her good hand grabbing his arm. "Tayo, you cannot. They are everywhere." "Thorne wants me," he said. "He wants all of us, but he wants the leader. I'm going to give him a fight he will never forget." He looked up at the canyon walls. He saw Tside, his face a mask of grief. He saw Hask staring down at him, his expression one of confusion, of rage. They were still alive. They were still fighting. He had a plan. It was desperate. It was mad. But the letter had given him a focus he had never possessed. He was not just Tayo, the failed warrior. He was the Dine. He was the land itself, fighting back. The stalemate was broken by a shout from the soldiers' line. A white flag. A single soldier, unarmed, walked slowly into the open space, his hands raised high.
"Captain Thorne demands a parley,"
the soldier shouted, his voice cracking with fear.
"He will speak with your leader. Send out your leader."
Tayo looked at Alma. Her face was gray, her lips blue with pain. "Do not go," she whispered. "It is a trap." "I know," Tayo said. He stood up. He left the cover of the dead horses. He stood in the open, in the sunlight, his red knife still in his hand, Harrison's blood drying on his skin. He was a target for every rifle in the canyon, but no one fired.
"I am Tayo,"
he shouted, his voice a roar that echoed from the high red walls. "I am the leader, I will speak." The canyon fell into a sudden, terrible silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Every eye, Navajo and soldier, was on the lone man who stood in the open, his hand dripping blood, his body a map of old and new wounds. "Tayo," Alma's voice was a desperate, dry whisper.
"No, do not."
He ignored her, his gaze locked on the rocks at the canyon mouth, where Captain Thorne emerged. His blue uniform immaculate, his face a mask of arrogance. Thorne walked forward, his hand resting on the polished leather of his saber hilt. He, too, was in the open. The two leaders, the two worlds, advanced until they were 30 yards apart. "So," Thorne's voice was a cultivated, Eastern sound. "The brave leader. I have heard of you. The scout who turned. The man who runs." Tayo said nothing. He simply stood, watching. His stillness was more unnerving than any threat. "You have cost me good men." Thorne said, "This is over. You are trapped. Throw down your arms, surrender your people, and I will be merciful. I will only hang you." Tayo let the silence stretch. He looked past Thorne, at the line of soldiers, at their tired, sun-scorched faces. He raised his voice, not shouting, but projecting, so that every man in the canyon could hear. "You have no mercy to give." Tayo's voice boomed. "And you have no authority." Thorne's smile faltered. "I am an officer of the United States Army. I am the authority." "You are a thief," Tayo said. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the leather satchel he had taken from Harrison. He held up the map. "You are a thief and a liar." He held up the letter. "You are not here for the United States. You are here for Mr. Harrison's consortium." A murmur went through the soldiers. They had seen Harrison. They knew his name. "You are not fighting hostiles." Tayo's voice rose. "A prosecutor's, a judge's. You are a private army, clearing land for a dead man." He gestured with his knife toward Harrison's body. "You are killing for his profit. You are dying for this captain's greed." "That is a lie," Thorne roared, his face turning a dark red. "He is a savage. Men do not listen to him. Ready your arms." "Is it a lie?" Tayo shouted, taking a step forward. "Then what is this an official map, marking our land, our sacred places as proposed dam site, mining rights, township of Thorne?" He threw the map onto the ground between them. "You are not soldiers. You are murderers. Here to wipe us from the land so your captain can get rich." The soldiers were looking at each other, their rifles held low. They had been told this was a military operation. They were weary of this war. They were here for their $1 a day, not to die for their captain's private land deal. "And it is not just the land," Tayo's voice dropped, becoming a low, terrible thing, filled with the rage of the letter he had read. "He is here to destroy our souls. He is here to take our children, to civilize them, to make them forget their mothers, their gods." "He is a liar, Thorn shrieked. He pulled his revolver from its holster. "Silence him, fire!" But no one fired. The line of soldiers was frozen. Their loyalty, their very reason for being here, shattered. Behind the dead horse, Alma watched. Her body was a fire of pain, but her mind was sharp. She saw what Tayo was doing. He was breaking their will. She looked at the men who had chased her. Harrison's men, who were still near the canyon mouth, their horses gathered. They were not soldiers. They were hired guns. Their boss was dead. They were watching this, their faces full of confusion. This was not what they had signed up for. They had no stake in this fight. She saw one of them, a thin man with a weasel's face, quietly gathering the reins of his horse, his eyes flicking to the open plains.
"Silas,"
she whispered, her voice tight.
"the rifle. Give it to me."
"But you are hurt," he whimpered.
"Give it to me,"
she hissed. He pushed the heavy rifle into her good hand. She gritted her teeth, the movement sending a wave of black sickness through her. She rested the barrel on the back of the dead horse. She could not lift it to her shoulder. She aimed, not at the man, but at the rock face just beside his head. She pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening. The bullet screamed off the rock. The weasel-faced man yelled in terror, dropping the reins.
"They are running!"
Alma shrieked, her voice high and clear. "Harrison's men are running. They are cowards." It was the tipping point. Harrison's men, leaderless, exposed, and now being shot at, scrambled for their horses. They leaped into their saddles, wheeling the animals, and spurred them into a full, panicked gallop, fleeing the canyon, leaving the soldiers, leaving everyone. The soldiers saw it. Their allies. The reason they were in this mess were deserting them. They looked at their captain, a man now exposed as a corrupt, murderous liar. They looked at the Navajo, high on the rocks, their arrows and rifles ready. And they looked at Tayo, who stood before them, a figure of pure, righteous vengeance. Thorn, his face a mask of apoplectic rage, raised his revolver and fired at Tayo. The shot was wild. Thorn was shaking with fury. Tayo did not flinch. He did not run. He raised his bloody knife, a high, terrible salute, and he roared, a sound not of his language, or any language, but the raw, primal scream of the land itself. "Dine!" he bellowed. It was the only signal needed. High on the ledge, Husky, his heart pounding, his shame burned away. His soul, lit by Tayo's fire, rose to his full height. "Warriors," he screamed. "With him, for our people, He led the charge, the handful of Navajo warriors, men who had been starving, who had been hiding, who had been broken, poured from the rocks. They did not run. They fell, like an avalanche, a wave of desperate, fearless men, knives and axes in their hands. They were not fighting for victory. They were fighting for existence. The soldiers' line, which had been a wall of discipline, dissolved. It became a mob of terrified, individual men. They were caught between the charging warriors from above and the impossible, godlike man in front of them. This was not a battle. It was a butchering. "Retreat!" a sergeant screamed, his voice cracking. "Retreat!" The bugler, his hands shaking, raised the horn to his lips and blew the call, a frantic, broken sound. The soldiers ran. They threw down their rifles, their packs, anything that would slow them. They scrambled over each other, a panicked blue herd, fleeing the canyon of death. Captain Thorn, his face white, his hat gone, ran with them. He stumbled, fell, got up, and kept running, his saber dragging in the dust. Tayo did not pursue. He stood, his chest heaving, his body screaming in protest. He watched them go, a disorganized, broken mob, disappearing down the valley, leaving their dead, their supplies, their honor. The canyon was silent. The dust began to settle. The only sound was the harsh, ragged breathing of the victors and the low moans of the wounded. The Navajo stood, dazed. They looked at the dead soldiers. They looked at their own fallen. They looked at Tayo. They had won. It was impossible, but they had won. Tayo turned, his legs suddenly weak, the strength that had held him up vanishing. He stumbled, then ran, back to the barricade of the dead horses. He fell to his knees beside Alma. She was watching him, her eyes bright with fever, with pain, and with something else, with a fierce, possessive pride.
You were magnificent,
she whispered. Her good hand reached out, not to his face, but to his bloody hand, the one that held the knife. She covered his fist with her own. He looked at her, the savagery draining from his face, leaving it pale and exhausted. He was shaking. He had faced death. He had led his people. He had exposed the truth, and he had come back to her.
Tayo.
A shadow fell over them. He looked up. It was Haska. His face was streaked with sweat and blood, his chest bare, his eyes wide. He stood over them, looking at Tayo, and at the white woman Tayo was cradling. Haska's gaze was full of a terrible, new understanding. He had hated this man, and this man had just saved them all. Haska said nothing. He unfastened the single, worn blanket from his own shoulders. He bent down and gently, almost reverently, draped it over Alma's shivering body. It was a gesture of respect, of acceptance, of truce. Side and the other survivors were coming down from the rocks, the women emerging from the caves, their faces stained with tears, their children clinging to them. They were not celebrating. They were weeping. They were alive. But the cost had been terrible. They had won, but their homes were gone. Their way of life was shattered. Tayo looked down at Alma's face. Her eyes were closing, the pain and blood loss pulling her under. He gently brushed the hair from her face, his bloody fingers leaving a streak on her pale forehead. "You are safe," he whispered. "I have you." He looked at the map, the letter, lying in the dust. He looked at his people, gathering around him. Their new, fragile hope centered on him. And he looked at the woman in his arms. The battle was over, but the war for survival, for their future, had just begun. He knew, as he held her, that his life was no longer his own. It belonged to his people, and it belonged to her. The two, which had seemed so impossible, were now one. He had to save them both. He bent his head, his love for her a raw, undeniable thing in the middle of the carnage. And he did not care who saw. He was a warrior. She was his, and they had, against all odds, survived. The silence that fell over the canyon was heavier and more terrible than the noise of the battle. It was a silence filled with the metallic scent of blood and the low, stunned whimpering of those who had survived. The Navajo warriors stood in a loose, ragged circle, staring at the bodies of the soldiers, at the fleeing dust of the survivors. They had done the impossible. They had won. And now, in the silence, the price of that victory settled on them like a shroud. Tayo did not move. He stayed on his knees, his hands covering Alma's, his gaze fixed on her pale, sweat-sheened face. She was breathing, shallow, ragged gasps. But she was alive. The blanket Haska had given her was a dark stain against the red rock, a small island of comfort in the carnage. "We must move." Side's voice was cracked, ancient. He put a trembling hand on Tayo's shoulder. "We cannot stay here. This is a place of death." Tayo nodded, his mind a slow, thick fog. He tried to stand, to lift her. As he put his weight on his legs, a fresh, searing pain ripped through his side. The old bayonet wound, the one he had received by the river, had been torn open by his leap. He looked down. His shirt was soaked, his own blood mixing with Harrison's on his skin. He stumbled, a gasp of pain escaping his lips. Hask, his face a mask of grime and exhaustion, stepped forward. He did not speak. He simply put his own strong shoulder under Tayo's arm, taking his weight. The two men, who had been enemies an hour before, stood together, a silent, mutual support.
Silas,
Tayo grunted, his voice tight with pain.
Your sister, we must make a litter.
The boy, who had been huddled behind the dead horse, his face frozen in a mask of shock, looked up. His eyes were huge, vacant.
Silas!
Tayo's voice was sharp, a command that cut through the boy's terror.
Now, there are rifles, lances, blankets. Make a travois. We must carry her.
The command, the need to act, broke the boy's paralysis. He scrambled to his feet, his limbs shaking, and ran to do as he was told. The women and children were emerging from the high caves, their feet silent on the rock. They walked into the canyon floor, their face blank with disbelief, with grief. They found their dead, the handful of warriors who had fallen. Lo, terrible wails of mourning began to fill the canyon, a sound worse than the gunfire. Tayo, leaning on Haska, looked at the scene. He had won. He was their leader, and this was his victory. A handful of dead soldiers, a few captured rifles, a starving, homeless people, their homes in ashes, and the woman he loved, bleeding, perhaps dying, in the dust. The victory was as bitter as ash in his mouth. He felt a wave of profound, bone-deep weariness, a despair so cold it threatened to stop his heart. What had he won? The right to starve in a different canyon. The supplies, Haska said, his voice a low rumble. He understood. He pointed to the packs the soldiers had dropped, the saddlebags on the dead horses. We take what we can. We take the ammunition, the canteens, the food. We leave nothing. This new, practical alliance was the only thing that kept Tayo moving, while the women mourned. The remaining warriors, perhaps 15 of them, moved through the battlefield. They were grim, efficient. They took every rifle, every bullet. They found hardtack and dried beef. They found medical supplies, small pouches with bandages and whiskey. They worked quickly, in silence. Tside, the old man, found the map and the letter where Tayo had dropped them. He folded them and tucked them into his own belt. He knew what they were. He knew their power. They made the travois. They lifted Alma onto it, her body limp. She moaned, a low, animal sound of pain, but she did not wake. Her fever was already high, her skin hot to the touch. The bullet was still in her shoulder. A poison. They had to leave. They could not go back to Alma's homestead. It was a pile of smoking embers. They could not go back to their village. It was a damn sight on a white man's map. Where do we go? Haske asked, his voice low, directed only at Tayo. It was a question of a lieutenant to his commander. The hatred was gone. In the fire of the battle, a new respect had been forged. Tayo's head throbbed. His side was a constant, dull fire. He looked at the line of his people, this broken, terrified remnant. He looked at Alma, pale as death on her litter. South, he said. His voice was a rasp. There is a place, a valley, hidden, with water. My grandfather showed it to me when I was a boy. A place of healing. We will go there. The journey was a blur of misery. It took them 2 days. They moved slowly, a procession of ghosts. The wounded, Alma and 3 other warriors, were carried. The children were weak, their bellies empty. Tayo rode his pony, but he was slumped forward. His hands knotted in the mane, just staying conscious. Haske walked at the front, his new rifle ready, scouting, leading. Silas walked beside Alma's travois. He never left her side. He held her hand, her hot, dry hand, and talked to her, a constant, low stream of words, telling her about his drawings, about their cabin, as if by speaking, he could keep her tethered to the world. Alma was lost. She floated in a red, hot fog of pain. She was aware, in fleeting moments, of the sky, of the jolting, of Silas's small, cool hand. But mostly, she was aware of the burning. The wound in her shoulder was a furnace, and the fire was spreading. She knew, in a distant, clear-eyed part of her mind, that she was dying. Her family was gone. Her father, her mother, her home. Now, she would leave Silas. He would be alone. The thought was a pain worse than the bullet. She tried to fight, to pull herself back, but the darkness was too strong, too soft. On the evening of the second day, they found the valley. It was as Tayo had remembered, a small, green cup hidden in a fold of the red mountains, a stream of clear, cold water running through it. They collapsed. They had run as far as they could. They made a small camp. The women built fires. Small, smokeless. They boiled water. They made a thin broth from the soldiers' rations. Sede, who knew the old ways, knew the healing arts, went to work. He cleaned and bound the wounds of the other warriors. Then he came to Tayo. Tayo sat by the fire, his back against a rock, his face gray. Sede gently cut away the bloody shirt. The wound was angry, red and swollen. The stitches Alma had put in his old wound had torn, and the flesh was ugly. "You are a fool, Tayo," the old man said, his voice gentle. "You leaped like a young hawk, but your body is not young." "The woman," Tayo whispered, his eyes on the pallet where Alma lay. "See to her. She is worse." "I will," Sede said. "But you must live. They need you." He cleaned the wound, packed it with a poultice of herbs he had gathered, and bound it tightly. The clean white bandages from the soldier's pack a stark contrast to his dark, wrinkled hands. The pain was sharp, but clean. Then Sede went to Alma. Silas sat beside her, refusing to move. Sede knelt. He looked at the wound. It was dark, swollen, the edges a frightening purple. "The bullet is deep," he said to Tayo, who had dragged himself over. "And the fever. It is in her blood. You must take it out," Tayo said. "I will try. Hold her," Sede commanded. Tayo knelt. He looked at Alma's face, so still, her lips cracked. He put his hands on her good shoulder, on her arm. Silas held her hand. Sede took his knife. The blade heated in the fire, and he began to cut. Alma did not scream. She arched off the pallet, a single, tearing sound, a gasp of pure, primal agony. Her eyes flew open, but they did not see them. Then she fell back, limp. Sede probed the wound. Tayo felt her body tremble, a terrible, convulsive shaking. He held her, his heart breaking, whispering her name, over and over, a prayer. "I have it," Sede said. He pulled his hand back. In his bloody fingers, he held a dark, misshapen piece of lead. He dropped it on the ground. He quickly packed the wound with more herbs and bound it. "Now," Sede said, standing, his face grim in the firelight, "it is up to the spirits, and to her." For 3 days, she did not wake. The camp lived in a quiet, gray limbo. They were safe, for now. They had a little food, but their leader, Tayo, was crippled by his own wound, and the woman who was his strength, his reason, was dying. Tayo sat by her. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He just sat, his own pain a distant, dull echo of hers. He watched her breathe. He watched the fever consume her. He was mired in a black, suffocating despair. He had failed. He had led his people to this, a victory that looked exactly like a defeat. He had nothing. He was tired. He was broken. He remembered the feel of her lips, the impossible, desperate kiss. He had fought for that, for a future. And now, she was dying. The future was dying with her. On the third night, he sat, his head in his hands. The camp was silent. The letter from Thorn, the map, lay on the ground beside him. Side had given them to him. They were his burden now. Destroy their culture, take their children. A dead one is equally civilized. He felt the hatred, but it was a cold, dead thing. It was just an ache. He was too tired to be angry. Tayo. The voice was a dry leaf, a whisper. He thought he had imagined it. He looked up. Alma's eyes were open. They were clear. The fever had broken. She was looking at him. "You are alive," he breathed. The words were stones in his throat. "So are you," she whispered. Her good hand, thin and pale, moved, reaching for him. He took it. Her skin was cool. "They burned my home," she said, her voice a thread. "I know," he said. "Silas, is he... He is safe. He is here." He nodded to where the boy slept, curled up at the foot of her pallet. She was silent for a long time, her eyes drinking in his face. She saw the despair. She saw the exhaustion. She saw the man who had given up. "So," she whispered, her fingers tightening on his, "we build a new one." He stared at her. "A new... what?" "A new home," she said. Her voice was weak, but the iron was back in it, the stubbornness that refused to be broken. They took ours, so we build another here." He looked at her, at this woman who had been shot, who had lost everything, who had just come back from the edge of death, and she was talking about building. "It is not that simple," he said, his voice rough. "This is not our land, not anymore. That letter, that map, they will hunt us. They will not stop until we are all dead, or in their schools, forgetting who we are. Then we will not let them." She said she was too weak to lift her head, but her eyes blazed. "You have your people, I have my brother. You have these." She touched the map. "The letter. You have the truth. And you have me. We are not dead. Tayo, we are alive." He looked at her. He looked at his hand, held in hers. He looked at Silas, sleeping. He looked across the fire, where Haske sat, cleaning a rifle, watching them, his face unreadable but not hostile. Alma was right. They were alive. He was tired. He was in pain. He was filled with a grief so large he could not see around it. But he was not alone. The conflict, the war inside him, had been between his duty and his heart, between his people and this woman. But now he saw they were the same. His heart was his duty. Saving her, saving Silas, was the same as saving his people. They were all survivors, all refugees. They were a new tribe, born in the fire of that canyon. He felt something shift inside him, a heavy stone of despair rolling aside. It was not hope. It was something harder, more durable. It was resolve. "Rest," he said, his voice thick. He squeezed her hand. "Heal. You will need your strength." "And you," she said, "will need yours. Leader." He nodded. He picked up the map. He looked at it, not as a chart of defeat, but as a weapon. He had the truth. He had his people. He had her. It was, as she said, a place to start. He was a warrior. He was a leader, and he would build a new life, a new home, for them all. Or he would die trying. The despair was gone. The fight was back. The Green Valley was a balm. After the red, raw violence of the canyon, this hidden place felt like a dream. But the pain was real, and the grief was a heavy blanket that smothered the small, broken band of survivors. They spent the first weeks in a haze of mourning and healing. The victory felt thin, a brittle thing that could shatter at any moment. Alma's fever held for 3 long days, a raging fire that Side and Tayo fought with cool water and bitter herbal brews. Tayo sat by her side, his own wound a dull, constant throb, his exhaustion a physical weight. He watched the life flicker in her, his heart a cold stone. He had made his choice in the canyon, had chosen her, and he could not bear the thought that the choice had been for nothing, that he had saved her only to watch her die. Silas never left her. He held her hand, his small, thin body curled at the side of her pallet, as if he could anchor her to the world through his grip alone. On the fourth morning, Tayo woke from a fitful doze to find her eyes open, the fever broken. She was looking at him. That simple gaze, clear and lucid, struck him with the force of a blow. The despair that had choked him finally receded. Her words, "So we build a new one," became their scripture. Healing was a slow, hard road. Alma's shoulder was a ruin of torn muscle. Sida's work with the knife had been necessary, but brutal. For a long time, she could not lift her arm. Her strength, the physical independence that had defined her, was gone. She, who had mended fences and split wood, now needed help to sit up, to drink. The frustration burned in her, but she fought it, just as she had fought the fever. Tayo healed beside her, his body mended, the old wound stitching itself together again under Sida's care. But his mind was restless. He was their leader now, not just of the Navajo, but of this strange, new, mixed family. He had Haska, who now followed him with a quiet, intense loyalty, born of that moment in the canyon. He had Sida, who was the heart of their traditions. And he had Alma, who was, he admitted to himself, the spine. She was the iron resolve. He also had the letter and the map. They were a poison and a shield. One evening, as Alma was strong enough to sit by the fire, her arm in a sling, he brought them to her. Haske and Sida sat with them. It was a council of war. Thorn ran, Haske said, his voice a low growl. "He is a coward, but he will not stay a coward. He will return, with more soldiers. We have won a battle, not the war. He will not return," Tayo said. He held up the letter. This is his shame. He was not on army business. He was a hired killer for Harrison. He broke his oath. "You should take it to the fort," Haske argued. "To the Great Father. Show them the truth. They will punish him." Tayo looked at Alma. He had seen the world of the white man, the inside of their forts. "They will not," Tayo said, his voice flat. "They will take the letter, and they will bury it. They will thank me, and then they will hang me for killing soldiers, or they will send us all to the reservation, to the schools that letter speaks of, to them. Thorn's crime was not murder. It was getting caught." Alma was quiet, her gaze on the fire. She looked at the map, at the township of Thorn. "He is right," she said, her voice soft but clear. "The law is not for people like us. It is for men like Harrison." She looked at Tayo. "It is a shield, not a sword. You do not use it to attack. You keep it. You let him know that you have it. Thorn will not come back, because he knows you have this. He will not risk a court-martial. He will declare his campaign a success, and he will go east. He will let us be, because he is afraid of this paper." Her logic was sharp and clear. Side and Haske saw the truth of it. They would not be hunted, as long as they held the proof of the hunter's crimes. "So we stay?" Side asked, looking around the small, green valley. "This is our home now." Tayo looked at Alma. This was the true decision. To stay here, hidden, and build a new life. To give up the old lands, the old war. To choose this, the future, over the ashes of the past. "We stay," Tayo said. "We build. We are no longer the people who run. We are the people who stay. This is our land now. We will make it our home." And so they began. The valley that had been a refuge became a settlement. It was a slow, hard birth. The remaining Navajo warriors became hunters and builders. The women, who had mourned their husbands and brothers, began the endless life-giving work of setting up a new camp. They scraped hides, gathered seeds, and built new shelters. It was not a Navajo village, and it was not a white homestead. It was something new. The Navajo built their hogans, facing the east, the doors made of captured army canvas. Tayo, Haske, and Silas, whose small hands were good for weaving branches, helped. And by the stream, they built a cabin. It was for Alma and Silas. Tayo began it himself. He was a warrior, not a carpenter, but he learned. He cut the pine from the high slopes. He notched the logs, his healing side aching in protest. Haske, seeing him struggle, came and worked beside him. The two men, side by side, raised the walls of Alma's new home. Alma, her arm still weak, directed them. She sat on a log, telling them how to set a threshold, how to frame a window, how to build a fireplace that would draw smoke. The Navajo women watched, curious. Soon, they were helping, their hands, so skilled at weaving, learning to mix mud and straw for chinking. They taught her, in turn, how to grind corn, how to find the sweet roots by the stream. Silas, her shadow, sat and sketched. He sketched the Navajo women, their faces strong and lined. He sketched Haske, his face a noble, stern profile. And he sketched Side, who, seeing the boy's talent, began to teach him. He drew the symbols of the gods. He drew the story of the long walk, the battle, the flight. He was in his own way, preserving their culture, their memory, on his small slate. Alma and Tayo found their new rhythm. It was a rhythm of work, of shared purpose, the deep, raw passion of their first kiss. The trauma that had bound them cooled into something stronger. It became a quiet, steady warmth, like the embers of the nightly fire. He would come to her cabin at the end of the long day, his body aching from the building. He would sit, and she would dress his wound, her touch now practiced, gentle. She did not need to be strong in that way anymore, and he did not need to be the lone warrior. They would sit in silence and watch Silas draw. "He is a good boy," Tayo said one evening. "He is," Alma said. She was mending one of his shirts, her needlework still clumsy with her healing shoulder. "He has your strength." "No," Tayo said, looking at her. "He has yours." The winter came, hard and cold, but the valley protected them. They had meat from the hunt. They had corn. They had shelter. They were a handful of survivors, perhaps 50 souls in all, but they were alive. In the long, dark nights, the village gathered in the largest hogan, the one they had built for ceremonies. Side, his voice a dry rasp, told the old stories. He told the children of the holy people, of the first man and the first woman. He taught them the songs. He was ensuring that the plan in Thorn's letter would fail. They would not forget who they were. Alma and Silas sat with them, listening. They were part of the story now. One night, Tayo and Alma sat outside the cabin, under a sky so cold it seemed brittle, the stars like chips of ice. "I am a widow, you know," she said, her voice quiet. "I was married for a year. When I was 18, he was a good man, a farmer. He died. The flu. I have been alone a long time. Tayo, I thought that was my life, to be alone." He looked at her, at the strong, beautiful line of her jaw in the moonlight. He had been alone, too. He had been a ghost, haunted by his failures. This woman, this valley, they had given him a new life. He knew that their love was not a simple thing. It was not just the bond of two people. It was the bond of their shared survival. It was the struggle. It was the sacrifice. It was the promise of a shared future, built with their own hands. "You are not alone anymore, Alma," he said, his voice low. He took her hand, her good hand, "and I am not alone. This," he gestured to the quiet valley, to the sleeping hogans, To the cabin. This is our home. I will not leave. I am here, with you, with Silas, with our people. She leaned her head against his shoulder. His arm, strong and sure, came around her, pulling her close. It was a promise. It was a conclusion. It was, after all the blood and the fire, a kind of happiness. The spring came, and the valley exploded with green. The stream ran full. Alma's shoulder was scarred, but she had regained most of its use. She planted a garden, a real one, with corn and squash and beans, the seeds the Navajo women had saved. Tayo's wound was a pale, silver mark on his side, a reminder. One morning, they stood on the rise at the edge of their valley, looking east, toward the vast, empty plains. The world beyond was still there. It was still dangerous. Men like Thorne and Harrison still existed. The lies in the letter were still the policy of a government. The future was not a guarantee of peace. But in this valley, they were free. Silas was with them. His slate in his hand, he was sketching the sunrise. Tayo put his arm around Alma's waist, pulling her against his side. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. They looked at the horizon, not with fear, but with resolve. They had faced the worst of the world, and they had, together, survived. They had learned that love was not a soft thing. It was a fortress. It was a fire. It was the will to build a new day from the ashes of the old. The land stretched out before them, and for the first time in their lives, it looked like a promise. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please share your thoughts and where you are in the comments below to connect with our community. We invite you to subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales. Like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button, so this story can be heard by more people.